we first again want to welcome you to a training that we specifically put together for manufacturers to assist you in understanding standard labeling requirements for all of our member states. Many of the state laws are different, but we have gotten together with them, and when you submit to IMERC, you will be providing all the information needed to comply with Mercury added product labeling for all of these member states. So let's talk about Mercury added product labeling as to who is responsible for labeling, what must be labeled, and where, meaning where compliance with these laws will allow you to offer your Mercury added product for sale. So let's start with the who. That responsibility is defined in member state laws, and a manufacturer is the one who holds that responsibility. But that definition also expands to brand owners if that brand owner dictates what information must be provided on the product or package, including the Mercury warning. Last, if a foreign manufacturer does not report or submit an alternative, that responsibility can also fall on someone who distributes an imported Mercury added product into IMERC member states. As far as what products must be labeled, a Mercury added product, that is also defined in state law. And some state laws further break that definition down into two categories: fabricated and formulated. A fabricated Mercury added product includes standalone mercury containing devices, such as a thermometer, or component parts that go into a larger product. And when those component parts are placed into a larger product, that larger product then is also considered a Mercury added product. The other category is formulated, and these are types of products such as laboratory compounds, reagents, amalgam, and so forth. Where in this slide identifies the IMERC member states in which labeling laws exist and for which reporting to IMERC those laws can be fulfilled. Keep in mind that other IMERC member states, including these listed, have additional Mercury laws that would also restrict sale in member states, such as reporting laws, which we refer to as notification, and phase-out restrictions on sale, which are also requirements to sell in IMERC member states, but we can talk about those further. So what must a manufacturer do to implement standard labeling, and why are we even talking about standard labeling? The next slides are an overview of IMERC member states' standard labeling, meaning if you fulfill these requirements, you are labeling according to the requirements and you can sell into the IMERC member states. There are basically three areas where labeling is required. The product. This can be a fabricated product, as we spoke about. It could be a standalone product. It could be a component part if you're selling that component part, like a lamp. A larger product that contains Mercury added component part, or a formulated Mercury added product. The product, as we refer to it, is what you are offering for sale to a consumer, even if that consumer is another manufacturer. The package, that's the container that the product is placed in. If products are sold in bulk and multiple products are in a package, that multiple product package must also be labeled. We're not really talking about a shipping box. We are talking about a product box. If you have specific questions about that and you want to submit that question to the labeling work group, you can certainly do that. The third component is pretty straightforward, and states really check into this aspect very frequently. The question is, how do you market your product? The answer for prior to purchase visibility is that you must identify in every possible scenario that where you market it, that your product contains mercury. The consumer must know in advance so they can make an informed decision for purchase. And this prior to purchase must also identify that you can throw the product into the regular trash. And we'll talk more about this. Last, if you meet all the standard labeling requirements, product, package, and prior to purchase, you can just do it as the slide suggests, but the details will identify if your labeling is standard or if it's an alternative labeling requirement. The notification, the notice here is if you can achieve standard labeling with all of its caveats, you have saved yourself a 2-year renewal requirement for an alternative labeling plan. With that, the states recommend if you're not certain if you meet standard labeling to ask rather than go forward with something later. First, this is a random photo that I took years ago that I'm using to represent Mercury added products. So if your product's not on there, we're talking about all Mercury added products. The important item here is when we are talking about labeling requirements for Mercury added products, there are specifics. So let's start with the right side of the screen. The label must be placed directly on the product. Now, the directly on the product does have some instances that may be considered directly on the product, such as a lamp. Not all standard labeling would need to be on the glass. A lamp with an attached cord, for instance, that's a lead, and that lead is a permanent part of the lamp. That cord is part of the product, and you could potentially put the label around the cord. The base of a lamp is another part of the product in this instance. If the product is liquid, directly on the product could be a bottle that contains the liquid. So that is something else to consider that could be approved or instruction provided by the states. Now let's talk about visible. A visible label is identified in state laws. That could be visibly placed in a location where labels may already exist. So the consumer already knows where to look. I've seen labels on the bottom of boxes, and that's not visible. Visible in those laws can also pertain to the label itself and whether symbols on the label are large enough to be legible and recognizable. That's where that 10-point font comes in. Durable is another aspect that you must meet by state law. The information, it says, in state laws must be etched, mounted, or otherwise affixed to the product to remain in place to last the life of the product. You can have all the standard labeling, but if you put a label on and it catches on fire because your product gets too hot, that's not a durable label and not a standard label. Now let's get into the details as to what a standard label must say. First, the label on the product itself must say the words contains mercury in a minimum 10-point font size. That's that specific guidance for visible, which is the minimum font, but if there's more space, it can be larger, not smaller. If the font is, for example, 8-point font, that difference would not pass as a standard label. In addition to contains mercury, there must also be disposal information that identifies the product cannot go into the regular trash. The statement here, dispose according to local, state, or federal laws, is one of the most common. We see that on a lot of labels. Other words other than these can be acceptable as long as those words basically identify that the product cannot go in the trash. There are other identifying factors that could allow, something other than words. And so the minimum for disposal requirements is a crossed out trash can or a crossed out wheelie bin. You'll note that there's two options here. And the reason for that is the crossed out trash can was the first identification of not being able to put in the trash. But later on, most of you probably know the EU came up with the crossed out wheelie bin, and the states accepted that as cannot place in the trash as well. That reasoning also to prevent any duplicate information on the same product. Last, and this is just for mercury added lamps, nothing else. Just mercury added lamps. There is one additional requirement for standard labeling. The lamp must have HG in a circle on the lamp. As a side note, some manufacturers in the beginning didn't have space to place HG within a circle and instead placed a line under the HG. So lamp manufacturers, the HG with a line has been considered and is approved as an alternative, but is not standard labeling. So that would require an alternative labeling plan. So now let's look at some examples of what we're talking about for the sake of clarification. And all of the words for all of these example labels, of course, would need to be 10-point font in order to meet the visibility requirement. On the left, there are two types of labels. These would be the minimum. The top one is for a Mercury added product labeling, contains Mercury with the crossed out wheelie bin. The bottom one would be a minimum for a Mercury added lamp. HG contains Mercury with a crossed out wheelie bin. But if your product is a Mercury added lamp, you must have that HG in the circle. On the right are label examples for a larger product that contains a Mercury added component part. Notice I used a larger product that contained a Mercury added lamp as its internal Mercury added component. The point is that the internal component must be identified. It could be a switch or a relay or anything else. The reason I used lamps is that the word lamp alone could identify the internal component. HG is not required, of course, on the larger product because it's not a lamp, but here in these examples, the HG on the first label might help to identify the internal lamp if it has an HG on it as part of the labeling of the lamp. The second label says HID lamps contain Mercury, dispose of properly. This is on a larger product. It identifies the HID lamps. That's the internal component. It says dispose of properly. So here's a note on that. Dispose of properly is not accepted on its own. You can't say dispose carefully, dispose responsibly. Those are not action items that you can give to your consumer. If it says dispose of properly, you have to have enough information to identify that it can't go in the trash. Now the last one, UV lamp contains Mercury, and then that contains Mercury in French. Not a requirement, but some manufacturers need to put that on their product. For handling, breakage, and recycling or disposal, visit www.lamprecycle.org. I do want to mention this because that information was approved years ago if it was a lamp. So you can put it on an individual lamp package or something like that. Likely you won't have room for it on the product itself, but for here, since this larger product has an internal component that's a lamp, you can refer to lamprecycle.org. That is the website set up by NEMA, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. However, for clarity, this label has a crossed out wheelie bin. It can't hurt to have that clarity if you have the space. So next, let's talk about the package. You'll probably notice a few similarities here between the product and the package labeling. And whether the product is packaged individually or in a multi-pack, whether it's a larger product with an internal component, the product that offered for sale is sold in a package must be labeled. It must be, as on the right, must be directly on the package. The label must be durable to last on that package, and it must be visible to the consumer. And the same wording and the same font size requirements are that are for the product itself. The special note for this slide is if the package is within another package and it's not the shipping carton, you may need to label more than one package label. For instance, if you are selling individually packaged lamps and those are all labeled in the individual package, and then you send that in a larger package, that's not the shipping container, you may need to label that as well. A second note is if your information is in multiple languages and you're not able to achieve 10-point font on the package, this lesser font would constitute an alternative labeling plan requirement. So if you've got it in multiple languages, if the English language label is in 10-point font, then that may meet the minimum requirements, because these are requirements for the IMERC member states. Again, let's look at a few ideas for package labeling. On the left are some examples of package labels for Mercury added products, component parts, and Mercury added lamps. The important message here is that the minimum label on any single Mercury added product and packaging is that it must say contains Mercury in 10-point font with the crossed out wheelie bin. If your product is a lamp, the law only requires the product label to be on the lamp and have the HG in a circle. So if you put it on the package, that's a bonus, but it doesn't have to be there for the package label. It just has to be on the lamp. The good thing about having an HG on a lamp package label is that it ties it together and makes it more comprehensive. The package labels on the right are package labels for the products that utilize a mercury containing internal component part in the product. Remember, the product label for the larger product must inform the consumer what in the product contains mercury. You can't just say contains mercury. You must say what contains mercury on a larger product. The reasoning behind this, that some states require the internal component to be removed before placing the item in the trash or metal recycling. And if your product contains several lamps, you may need to be really specific as to what lamp in the product contains mercury. It's commonly indicated by the type of lamp. Notice the last label just says lamp. If your product is a light fixture, this would be an adequate bit of information. Third, and very important, is prior to purchase visibility. This is something that states very commonly check. They check the websites to see if the information is on each information slide by product. Having your product on the website is one of the most natural ways to market your product these days. But if your product is specialized, more information could be available on the sales brochures, product information sheet, telephone sales. Even telephone sales should be identifying that the product contains mercury and the disposal information. Mercury laws require that the customer knows they are purchasing a mercury added product. And there is a decision to be made knowing that there will also be requirements at the end of the life for that product. The same information with contains mercury and the disposal message are the minimum requirements. Where there is space may require more details, such as a material data sheet. Keep in mind, if you cannot achieve standard labeling and need to submit an alternative labeling plan, this prior to purchase information or labeling would still be required by the states. So this is something we wanted to share with you. This is a slide from the notification reporting. It basically mimics those requirements that were presented in this training. There are also an option to upload photos and information about how your products are being labeled in the notification submission. Once a manufacturer has gone to this level of trouble, the labeling information is provided to the labeling work group. And recently, manufacturers have provided labeling information to IMERC and the states by this process to see if they need to do anything else. And when they receive a note from the labeling work group that their labeling meets standard labeling provisions, they have that letter on file in their submission. And that's something they can add later on and just have it to show that they've met standard labeling. One thing to note is that the information provided here does not hold up the process for approval of your notification, but it does give opportunity for further dialogue on labeling. In addition, and here's another note, if you have a product that obviously can't be labeled directly on the product or a website that does not show the product contains mercury, simply checking all the boxes doesn't mean that there will not be follow-up. And so take the time and take advantage of this as a resource. This slide is more for information as it will be covered in the next training. This list here just shows a few common issues that might trigger the need for an alternative label, but just keep in mind, after this training, what you need to achieve is standard labeling. If you can achieve that, then you should just do it, as the first slide alluded to. But if you cannot comply with standard labeling, and there's a lot of instances where the productist won't allow it, here are some other reasons, and then you'll need to make an application and submit the alternative labeling plan. And this slide, keep in mind that if you decide to submit a plan, these are the issues that you are really needing to consider, because this is what is written in almost all, if not all, of the laws. That strict compliance with all the requirements is not feasible as determined by the IMERC member states. So remember, it not only has to have certain words, but they have to be a certain size and they have to be in a certain place. The second is that the proposed alternative would be at least as effective in providing notification of mercury content and instructions on proper disposal, as well as pre-sale information. That's that prior to purchase notification. Your alternative should have as much as you can in it to get as close as you can to standard labeling, and that usually assures an approval. Last, federal law governs labeling in a way that preempts state authority. In order to prove that, you would need the citation and probably a copy of the law to be attached. Last slide, thank you so much for your time. Remember, if you need assistance, imerc@nemoa.org is the best email to keep. That goes to more than one person, and it is not specific by person. It will always follow whoever's working on the IMERC information that comes in. There are other links here that we thought would be helpful. Please use them. And again, thank you so much. And we will now take some questions. And if you can refer to the slide, that would be very helpful to me.
Alrighty. I'm going to stop recording and